In this episode, we start at the heart of the Arab classroom, the teaching and learning of Arabic or Arabic literacy. For those new to the language, Arabic has a distinct feature that has implications on how it's taught. It's a diglossic language. There's a written form of Arabic called Fusha, and there's a spoken form called Ammiya based on where you live. So you can imagine how many dialects there are there. Our guests today are going to explore how this richness of language influences our relationship to Arabic inside the Arab classroom.
Welcome to a very special edition of our new series entitled Inside the Arab Classroom. We have a very special episode today. This series is a collaboration between New York University's Global Ties for Children and Afikra. Global Ties for Children is an international research center based in New York University focused on supporting education and child development research in low and middle income and crisis affected contexts. My name is Mikey Mhanna. I'm the host for today. With me is Hanada Taha, who is the endowed chair professor of Arabic language at Zayd University. She was previously acting dean of Bahrain Teachers College, and she earned her PhD in curriculum and instruction from the University of New Orleans and holds a master's degree in education psychology and a bachelor's degree in psychology from the American University of Beirut. With us is Reem Khamis, who is a professor of speech-language pathology and director of the Neurophysiology and Speech-Language Pathology Lab. She's a member of the Speech-Language Hearing Scientists Equity Action Collective and a recipient of the 2020 Excellence in Diversity Award from the Council of Academic Programs in Communication Sciences and Disorders. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you both here. Hanada, I want to start with you for a second. So I read your degrees. When did you first start working in the world of literacy and the world of education? And if you don't think you work in that world, what world do you think you work in?
I work in an amazing world of kids and children and children's literature and, of course, Arabic language. And this is actually very embarrassing, Mikey, asking me when. You don't ask that. It's been a long
That's
time.
True.
Very long time. I think right when I graduated my bachelor's from AUB, and I started teaching at IC first, teaching third graders Arabic. And I think to date, this is the most fascinating thing I've done, the most heartwarming thing I've done. And it hooked me onto teaching.
Yeah. Did you always think, before we move on to and bring Reem into the discussion, did you always think that you would have spent a career in and around classrooms?
No. I wanted a career in first in politics. I wanted to be an ambassador, and then I was told I don't have the right sect or what have you back in Lebanon. It's like, you better change. So I said, okay, clinical psychology, that would be my thing. But then I just fell in love with Arabic and with teaching.
Yeah. Reem, what about you? When did you first get involved in the world of education?
No, that's a very interesting question. As a Palestinian, I think education is very important for us, and every person there is aware of the importance of community-based education and how much education is important for you to actually be free-minded and to be able to develop as a person and as a community. So from the beginning, I was very much fascinated with education and the role it has in the development of community. My father was a principal of a school. So at home, we always had discussions related to schooling, including at times they were discussing if they should have a uniform or not have a uniform. But my involvement with literacy is more related to my practice as a speech-language therapist. Speech-language therapist is a profession that is more in charge or responsible and trained and educated to focus on communication disorders, which include children that have delays in developing their language. And as you probably know, reading and writing is a representation of language. So children that are at risk for developing their language. They're also at risk for having difficulty with reading and writing. Actually, my PhD was mostly inspired by my work when one of my teachers at school brought his son to be evaluated for reading disabilities. And I was trained, based on the Western, frameworks. So I did all the tests with the phonological awareness in Ammiye and all the tests of everything that you're supposed to do. And then at one point he looked at me and he was like, "Aren't you going to check Fusha?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah. Why am I not checking Fusha?" And this is actually what triggered my interest in doing my PhD, where I went and I examined language development of Ammiya and Fusha in children.
Okay, I want to set the stage a little bit for our listeners, right? So this series is all about taking our listeners inside the Arab classroom and trying to understand what's really happening in these spaces. What is the state of the Arabic language and specifically Arabic literacy, not globally, but in Arabic speaking countries? Hanada, maybe we can start with you.
The question is really, I don't know, maybe we need to reconfigure. It asks about the state of Arabic language. I think Arabic language is well and good and fine and will be fine. But when you talk about teaching and learning, the actual, what's happening with the teaching and learning, if we are focusing on the Arabic language classroom, I think this is the issue. There is an issue. There is a big challenge. There is a pedagogical imperative when we are teaching Arabic language that we are not paying attention to. We keep on saying it's the Ammiya and Fasiha, it's the Diglossia, it's this and that, but really, if you observe classrooms, if you go inside and you sit and watch, you notice, you realize that these poor teachers don't know how to teach nor what to teach. And the curriculum is, it talks to another era and another time. It's not for our time, not for these kids. And that's it, I think.
Let me stay with you for a second. Just out of curiosity, why?
This is an excellent question. It's the simple and excellent question. And I'm not simplifying the answer here, but honestly, based on my observations, what I have seen year after year after year, and we're talking 30 years of this, we are not getting the teacher preparation and teacher training right. We are not getting curriculum right. We have, especially for Arabic language curricula, let me tell you how the process works. So you have 3, 4, 5 people sitting together in an office called the curriculum directorate in ministries, and they write the curriculum. They decide for the whole nation what things they will read. It's all things that are unauthentic, that are boring, that smell of Clorox. You know what Clorox and Dettol is? That's what they smell of, these texts. So these teachers are not prepared well. You go look at the preparation at colleges of education, preparing Arabic language teachers, and it's horrendous. It has nothing to do with 2023, for example, or the 21st century. You look at the training, and the training is abysmal. And in my opinion, it's as simple as that. Get the training right, get the preparation right, get an okay curriculum. We're not saying, cutting edge, world class. Okay, will do. And I bet you the next Pearls, the next international test we do on reading, we will do so much better.
Yeah. And, I was listening to Hanada, and I agree 100% that teacher training and teacher education is very important. At the same time, I don't have a really clear idea of the whole state, but I can say that it's multifaceted in that sense that, one, we have globalization and we have the effect of colonization that impacts what's considered the language for success in many of the Arab countries compared to other countries where the language that they speak is the language that they actually can give them the access to succeed in jobs, in academic work, and to be able to develop. Second, we can't take away that, Arabic language is targeted language. It's a language that is stereotyped to be the language of the terrorists. If you look at movies and TV shows, at least, in that perspective. And at this point of time, we're not anymore living in our own small college, in our small, village. We're living in the whole world and we have access to everything. So the fact that also Arabic is a targeted language in many, many ways, as Arab people and Muslim people are also targeted, then that also adds another dimension for the barriers that we're seeing for people to feel the access of the language learning effectively working. But then from my perspective as a researcher, I think the most important part is that we don't have the research that is decolonized, that is coming from a place where we really see how language develops in the context of the Arab world in the different regions. Of course, we have different characteristics that are specific for different regions. In that sense, that everything that we have been trying so far is shipped. It's shipped programs from England and from the United States. And I have no problem with shipping. I have no problem with exporting ideas. I'm a person that loves reading and learning from everyone. But there are cases where we have to be critical realists in that sense, that we have to think about every curriculum that we're bringing to the student and check it out realistically. Is it fitting to that context? Is it critical enough to that context of the learner? Is it fitting to the way they are actually living day-to-day life? So if you just think about it, we have a lot of knowledge now about language development and the relationship between language and reading. That shows that we have to have a connection between phonological development and language development and reading and writing. Meanwhile, our textbooks are still introducing children to letters based on their visual characteristics. So we start with the letters that are disconnected, and then we move that don't change, and then we move to different sounds that are connected and change their setting. But if we think about it from the perspective of what we know about language development and its relationship to reading and writing, then we need to shift the whole way we're teaching these letters, and the introduction has to be based on what sounds are actually acquired early in language development and what sounds are acquired a little bit later. Then if you think about it in terms of diglossia, which, I don't want to present diglossia as a problem. I don't think diglossia is a problem. I think diglossia is a phenomena that is of so much interest and brings with it so many advantages. And I see it in the kids in my family. There's so much richness by having the access for these two language varieties, and kids play.
Reem, sorry, I have to stop you. I have to stop you for a second. Right. What is that word and what does it mean?
Diglossia? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I thought because when I start speaking about this, I don't stop. And I'm like, oh, okay, I need to stop and give a chance for somebody else to add.
What does that mean?
So diglossia is a term that has been developed by a person called, before that Marquez, but Charles Ferguson is known to be associated with that term. And it refers to a situation in a society where you have two language varieties. They're not two languages, but two language varieties that are distributed in a way that they complement each other. So in Arabic, you have the spoken dialect, which is the low variety, it was called, that is used for daily communication, and it's acquired naturally. Kids don't have to learn it. They just acquire it just by being exposed to it. And and then the other variety is referred to as the high variety by Ferguson. And it is like in the case of Arabic, the modern standard Arabic or the classical Arabic more likely, which is more standardized. And to be able to master it, you really have to get some formal education to be able to master it. And he presented several cases where you have diglossia in the world, not only Arabic, but for some reason, and no, it's not for some reason, it's because of the coloniality and because of the idea that we always have to, make different marginalized community look like, they're so different. And that gives sometimes, the okay to do bad things to these people because they're so different. They're not human in a way. And many times that's done even through language. Language is the easiest way to enable racist practices. We see it here in the US, and we see it with the Arab world, and we see it all around the world. So it's a very easy way to generalize about community by saying, oh, they're so different. They did that with the Chinese. They kept saying for a long time in research that, in Chinese, you use even different brain area to process language, when we all know that all languages are processed in the same, way. And languages definitely are something that is common between all people. So,
Reem, one second. I want to come back to one thing that you said. Just because I found it really interesting. You were saying that the way we teach languages, right? Well, the way we introduce children to literacy, basic literacy, is almost as if it was like the creator of the typewriter is teaching language, right? It's like, all right, now we're going to do the ones that change, right? As opposed to the person who's like actually focusing on like the way our brains and our mouths operate, right? So give us an example for the people who may or may not even speak Arabic who are listening to this. What are great examples of letters that would be used out of order, quote unquote, out of order, from a neurological perspective, versus ones that would be used in order?
So for example, the sound sa, it doesn't change much. So usually they start with ba, ta, sa. But sa is a sound that is acquired very late and is a sound for some dialects that is not matching between the dialect and the standard Arabic. But you usually see it part of the first letters that are taught in Arabic. Sa'lab, thallaja. And meanwhile, if you think about specific dialects, I can talk about the Galil dialect that I speak. In my dialect, I don't have tha, I don't use tha. So if you're introducing that sound because visually it's much easier to process, it's coming on the expense of more important knowledge, which is the development of language that is a basis for reading and writing. But more interesting, and here I want to highlight that, is that even those programs that might have started checking these out, they're still looking at it from the perspective of Western knowledge of English development. And they're still missing contributing design that actually takes into account the fact that children are exposed to spoken dialect. And while they're exposed to spoken dialect, they have some exposure to standard Arabic. And there are sounds that are similar. There are sounds that are not similar. There are words that are similar. There are words that are not similar. And there are sentence structures that are similar and sentence structures that are not similar. And that is not taken into account at all. So even the sentence structure has to be taken into account. And honestly, I don't have an answer if we should start with the shared ones or the non-shared ones, because we need evidence, we need research that checks what actually is more beneficial, to start with the differences and highlight the differences for the children, or to start with the common and then highlight and then move to the differences. But there's no research. So I think my main point that I wanted to say is that definitely the colonized research and that tendency to look for modern programs while not digging into being authentic in the kind of evidence that we're bringing to guide our work is problematic and definitely is not helping us move forward.
Okay, so I have a question about this. Hanada, I want to loop you in because you spent a good amount of time thinking about how to train teachers. And typically, I used to be a teacher, and I find teachers to be very pragmatic people. Generally, just trying to figure out how to get, the concepts into their kids' heads and get them over the finish line. And I can imagine that a teacher who is told, listen, Alif Ba Tha doesn't make sense, would be receptive to that. In your experience, what is the state of, or what has been your experience with training teachers, and why is there so much friction, and not as much progress as I would expect?
Good question. So with teacher training, there has been over the years so many things happen. So, and I'm talking all my experience. I'm talking just about what I've seen in the Arab world, in Arab countries, and what is happening. So a project comes. someone decides this is an amazing thought, an amazing idea, an amazing project. Like there was 15 years ago, everyone was talking about multiple intelligences, الذكاءات المتعددة. So everyone wants to get trained on that, whether it really relates to what they are doing, whether it's really a priority or not. It was these buzzwords. It becomes the main important thing. So they will get trained on something like that, or something like collaborative learning, or, any other buzzword, really. And we know also from research that just bringing these teachers in, giving them a day, 6 hours of training, then sending them back to the classroom, there is nothing that guarantees that transfer of learning like we are taught. You need to listen to this several times. You need to try it. You need someone in your classroom to coach you, to look at things with you, you need to go back to your team, to your colleagues, peers, and talk about it. What worked, what didn't work. And all of this, that setup, that infrastructure that will house these ideas and the training is not happening. So they go to the training, they get these different topics, they go back to the classroom and back to the old ways and ideas and things they were doing. So training, it seems that in our Arab world, we have not cracked that code. We have not cracked that, you don't follow buzzwords. You need to have plan. You need to have an annual plan. You were a teacher. We all were teachers. And that you need to know beforehand, like before the summer even hits, that, okay, next year, we are really going to be focusing on, the phonic approach or whatever it is. But it's one thing for the whole year. We will be talking about it, reading about it, watching each other, visiting classrooms. So I have not seen, except of course, there are definitely some pockets of excellence in the Arab world. There are some amazing schools, but it's this collective work that we need to see being done, especially by ministries of education led by them, that we are not seeing. Because one last thing, I think this type of work is not sexy enough. I can't put in a press release saying, hey, we did 90 hours of training for teachers. But if I said we bought every single classroom in the country has a smart board, that's kind of catchy. So.
Yeah, no. And that's always been the problem. I want to talk about this idea of pockets of excellence. And I want to think about it sort of like longitudinally for a second. I have sort of grown up under the myth, maybe it's a myth, or under the idea that, there were moments in time where entire cities and entire nations all spoke Arabic fluently. Everyone was perfect, from every single person, from the youngest to the oldest, whether it's like Syria or Iraq or I don't know where. Is that true? Has that ever been true? Are there more than pockets of excellence? Are there any examples of systems of excellence throughout, the last 100 years?
I don't know. We did not have these measures. We did not have the tools back then. So I cannot tell you. But what I can tell you is that we have a higher level of schooling, a higher percentage of schooling now. We have more people graduating with degrees now. We have more schools open and they're available now than 100 years ago. So the level of illiteracy is definitely much lower. So we have to be fair to the Arab world, Arab countries, and say they have really succeeded in minimizing percentages of illiteracy. We used to hear about 70% illiteracy, 80% illiteracy for women in many areas of the Arab world, and these are going down. So they have done that really well. What is still lacking? So we always say it's not the schooling years that is lacking now and the availability of school. It's quality education. So great. We have passed that era. We really have done something when we needed to within a very short time, get everyone in schools, have the compulsory education years. But now the question, it's been 20 years now in the works. Where is quality education? And why is it that we are not being able to offer it, except, again, for these pockets of excellence that we see in private schools around the Arab world?
Yeah. Reem, at some point I saw you sort of like nodding along, and I think it was when we were talking about tools and sort of measuring literacy. For the uninitiated, what is the smartest way to measure literacy when it comes to Arabic literacy across the region? Where are we?
I think one point that I want to highlight is, when you asked about what's the status of Arabic literacy, a lot of us think about, Arabic literacy is very low, and it's usually based on reports from international, UNESCO and other international organizations that test language reading in different countries. And unfortunately, they're using tests that are very problematic. Like, for example, there's the test called EGRA that examines reading within 1 minute. They don't give the child any time to actually finish reading. And based on the speed, they decide, what's the level of reading in different countries. So that's really important to highlight, that many times this information about the levels of Arabic, of reading in general across different countries, including Africa, are very problematic because they're using tests that have been developed in one language, and now they're translating it to different languages without taking any considerations of the specificities of these languages. And they're focusing a lot on the speed and automaticity, and that's very problematic because what we need to focus on is comprehension. I'm a big believer in what we call dynamic assessment. Dynamic assessment is different than any standardized assessment in that sense that it's more focused on getting to know what's the potential of a child. So you give a child a word and you tell them, read the word. And if they're unable to read it, you tell them, okay, I'm gonna hide this letter and I want you to try to read it now with only that part. And then I'm gonna tell him, okay, this part is da. Now let's put them together. Oh, dar. Now you figured it out. So I'm more examining not only if they can read it, and that's it. I'm examining what they need to get to that point where they can decode a word, or what they need, what cues they need in order to get to the point where they comprehend the paragraph. And once again, if we're going to take into consideration diglossia, what knowledge about Fusha and Ammiya is still missing for them, or they're unable to navigate, that we can provide for them so that they can succeed. I believe in dynamic assessment in general because I feel that it's a different value of testing. It's not about testing to categorize children and to put them in different groups and to say this one is good, this one is bad, but it's actually believing in every child and trying to figure out as a system, what is it that we need to do in order to give everybody a chance to succeed and to excel.
Yeah. Reem,
but may I interject? May I? Reem, this is all amazing. It's really fascinating what you're saying. And I wish we can reach a time where we are doing this. But also my thinking back to being a teacher and so pragmatic and realistic with the millions of kids we have in the Arab world who are not reading up to the level that they should be reading at, we know are not fluent, who in reading comprehension are not there, who don't have access even to children's literature and these extra texts that will help them. We need some of the mechanical, sometimes it's unattractive, but cookie cutter type of solutions just to help them, get them up to where they should
Hanada,
be.
We're on the same page. We're on the same
do.
page. We can do that with dynamic assessment through RTI, response to intervention. So RTI is dynamic framework where you screen every child at kindergarten. You screen based on emergent literacy. And then you can tell who are the children that are going to be at risk to actually have difficulty in learning to read and write. And you start intervening way before they actually have difficulties in reading to write. And you avoid all the issues that, are added to the fact that they start feeling bad about themselves. They have low esteem, and then the teachers start expecting less from them. So it's the same idea. If you have a screening for all children, which for me would include the readiness for fusha, asking the child, do you know that there's fusha and ahmi? Asking the child, if I'm going to tell you a sentence in fusha, tell me if it's grammatical or ungrammatical. If I tell the child, I'm going to tell you now a word in fusha and tell me which picture represents it. All of this, if it can be done at the early stages, and then we give intervention as early as possible, because early intervention is the most effective. Then we go to the second level. A lot of the children are going to not have any issues. Then whoever is left with some barriers and difficulties, then we give them a little bit more intensive intervention. That would include speech pathologists, I hope. But, we have a shortage in speech pathologists in the Arab world, but I'm hoping more and more will be involved in the literacy intervention. And it keeps going in that direction. But that's also considered a dynamic assessment at a bigger, larger scale. We're in the same place in our.
So, Reem, let me ask you a question. Who isn't in the same place? So let's say there's a third person or fourth person on this call. Who is smart and has the same incentives, long-term incentives, right? I mean, not somebody who hates kids and hates literacy, right? Somebody who is trying to pull in the same direction. What is their response? What is their response for what are the best reasons for why we don't have dynamic assessment from your perspective? Somebody you would respect.
It's not an easy question to ask, honestly. So you're really putting me in a place that I'm not going to be able to be as honest as I would want to be. But I think I'm going to go back again to the colonized learning and the system where we're educated. I think a lot of us with good intentions, they have been trained and educated, and I'm included. I now write a lot about my decolonization pathway and how at one point in my life, I probably was thinking, we need everybody to be on board and we need everybody to get, these specific markers, because this is what scientifically we've been taught about what the best pathway to succeed. So I'm not going to say that, it's their fault as much as it's the fault of the way the globalized Western education is becoming dominant in everything that we're thinking about when it comes to literacy. The other part is, I think that, the fact that our language is connected with nationalist and with religious powers. So there's a lot of other things that are also interfering with any attempt to even revolutionize teaching and learning, to the extent that I think they're making people that do care about Fusha, including myself, be sometimes afraid to even do that radical step, knowing that this radical step is going to be the one that is going to maintain Fusha, because it's going to be perceived as if you're actually in that group that is going to be, I don't know. Hanada, do you want to add something? I'm
they accuse you that you're a purist.
Yes.
And it comes with its own, dogmatic framework. You're a purist. When we are not at all.
I mean, are the very same systems doing a better job at teaching literacy, French literacy and English literacy and other literacy, but they're just struggling with teaching Arabic, or they're just struggling with teaching literacy, period?
It depends on the system. So from what I see, from what I have observed in classrooms and schools, private schools seem to be doing better in English. Because English, the system has been created. The teachers are, flown in. The curriculum is flown in and they deliver it. And our kids, I have to say, all parents, and I am not exaggerating when I say all, or so many parents are really saying that our kids are refusing to speak in Arabic now, because with Arabic, they call them local teachers. They don't have to be flown in I found an amazing teacher in a different country. They do not give them good contracts. They get less salaries. They are not given the same training, or they are trained in English. So the Arabic teacher is trained in English language. So of course, these schools are creating, this is by design, it seems, that in private schools, the English literacy or French or what have you is way better than the Arabic because they're not standing on equal footing. And then you have Western, with all due respect, Western administrations for whom Arabic, like the first thing principals tell me, well, but I don't speak Arabic. And my response is, I don't care if you don't speak Arabic. You have to know about Arabic teaching and learning. Don't speak it, but you have to know about its teaching and learning, its diglossic nature. You have to train teachers decently. You have to have the same budgets for Arabic that you have for English. You don't buy the cheapy books for Arabic. You buy the same level quality. So, but for public systems, it's different. I think for public systems, it's all kinds of literacy that is really having difficulty. It's a system that really needs help, needs ideas, needs some revolutionary leaders, I would say, to help lead that change.
Yeah. Okay. I have two last questions before we move on to the quick Q&A. And the first one is going to be one that I think both of you kind of scoff at, but I'm just going to ask it anyway.
You're not going easy on us, huh?
Yeah.
Let's scoff.
Hanada, I'll start with you. Why should we care? Okay. So you're speaking to, honestly, I want to try to take this question, which is a little tongue in cheek, but let's try to take it. If somebody's listening to this podcast right now and they're saying, okay, these administrators, they don't care that much about Arabic. They buy the cheapy books. So, all right. It's not hurting us that much, right? I mean, we seem to be doing just fine. What is your response to them? Are we doing just fine?
No.
Why should we care? What is at stake?
We should care because this is our language. This is our identity. This is our culture. This is the representation of who we are. And if we don't have good access to that language, it means you don't have access to 15, 16, 17 centuries of your own culture. You will start believing as a person that it is a loser culture. It's a loser language. We are losers. We are this and that. And we are not. We definitely are not. We have an incredibly beautiful language, an incredibly scientific and literary language. But unless we crack the code on teaching it, our kids will go through life just not seeing the beauty, not seeing the calligraphy, not seeing the architecture, not seeing the songs, not seeing the lyrics, the poetry we have, the scientists we had. So technically we should care because otherwise we will be people with colorless, odorless, with nothing. We will have no faces in a sense. You have no face.
I want to say we should care because the kids will lose so much if we lose that access to Fusha and Amniya. I look at my nieces and the way they play with Fusha and Amniya and the way they pretend they're doing Mudhi'a or Mudhi'a, and they switch between Fusha and Amniya, the way they switch to Fusha to make intention and emphasis. That's something that is an advantage to have. And it gives you tools to express yourself, to express your feelings, to express your emotions in a way that others who have monolingual systems don't have. The second part, I'm a reader. And once again, I want to go back to the fact that I am coming from a place that is culturally occupied. And getting access to reading Arabic was critical for my well-being, for knowing who I am, and for being able to develop in a way that I am comfortable with being myself and being able to understand who I am in the context where I am. And, it doesn't have to be that you have to live through occupation or through very harsh realities to understand that reading is a sanctuary. It's a place where you can, read fiction and you just go in a different world and you go into magical world. You learn about love. You learn about death. You learn about So many things.
Okay, we're going to end with the quick Q&A and then we'll wrap up the episode. So, Hanada, I'll start with you. What are you reading or watching these days?
So I read several books all at once because I get bored. So I'm listening to audio of the Silk Road. It's a new history of the world. Beautiful book. And I'm reading at the same time a history of economics called More by Philip Kogan. And I'm also reading Ahlam Mustaghani, her new biography called أصبحت أنت. So all of these.
Nice. Reem, what about you?
So every Sunday at 9, I watch with my kids Succession. And I'm also watching a New Zealand drama. It's called Rurangi. Books-wise, I'm in a book club. And one book club, we're reading Jimi Hendrix Live in Lviv, which is about Ukraine and living in Crimea. Another scholar that I didn't know about, his name is Mahdi Amil from Lebanon. And I'm reading Arab Marxism and National Liberation.
Very interesting. Okay, next one. Who would you love to shadow for a day, past or present?
I've two people I'd like to shadow from the past. The first one is Ibn Arabi. He's the famous Sufist. He wrote beautiful poetry. The most namely, I only can say it in Arabic, لَقَدْ صَارَ قَلْبِي قَابِلًا كُلَّ صُورَةٍ. And you can continue that. So Ibn Arabi I would love to follow him for a day. Second one is actually Khadija, the wife of Prophet Muhammad, who was 15 years older than he is, and she was the businesswoman with the money.
Reem, what about you?
I would love to shadow Angela Davis one day. I love her scholarship and advocacy, and I adore her. This
is the question I was most looking forward to. Hanada, what do you think people most misunderstand about your work?
Okay. So I happen to sit in the middle. The people who are out there call me the purist, and the people who are the purists call me the apostate for my talks about Arabic grammar and not doing grammar in school. So I think on both sides, I'm being slammed. They don't understand that while I love Fasiha and I'm a big proponent of modern standard Arabic, and I think everyone should learn it. At the same time, I believe we need to go for simplification. We need to take another look at our grammar. We need to modernize the way we do things. So, and that's why I get slammed from all sides.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
People, I think sometimes they have reductive interpretation of my work. The other part that I want to add, just because I want to share it, at one point in my life, there were times that any time that I needed to submit a paper and it was ready, I would wait 3 months just to have the stamina and the energy to deal with the reviews. Because usually the reviews would be one reviewer saying, excellent, innovating, you're assessing the 2 language varieties, Fusha and Ammiya, wonderful, we need to know more of this. And then another person who would just kill it by saying, you can't examine Fusha and how it's processed in the brain by a child, or you can't examine Ammiya because, we shouldn't, work with Ammiya.
Okay. And then last one is, whose work do you admire or are inspired by? I'm sure there's a long list. Hanada, let's start with you.
Honestly, I will not go with someone from my field, but someone who has constantly inspired me in his writings and unbelievable. And this guy is Amin Malouf. It's incredible what he writes, that historical fiction, the way he writes, the way he speaks about his origins and being an Arab of an Arab descent. I found it fascinating and inspirational.
Wait, hold on for a second. Doesn't Amir Malouf very famously not write in Arabic because he doesn't feel comfortable writing in Arabic?
That's true. He writes in French and then it's translated. And I read it in Arabic.
So he clearly has access to his heritage and his...
I bet he's afraid of being attacked. but he reads Arabic.
Amazing. So good. Reem, what about you?
I admire a lot of people, it's true. But at this point, I'm reading about Mahdi Amil. And I'm really fascinated by how he actually looks at Marxism from a critical perspective. In my field, from neurocognitive studies, there's a professor, her name is Deborah Titon. She's from McGill University, and she does a lot of work on bilingualism and multilingualism.
I love it. Well, thank you to you both. It was a very, very enlightening conversation. I have so much more work to do and so much more research to do. If anyone's interested in connecting with either of you, both of you are pretty easy to find online. So you can look up on Google and on social media. Thank you so much for being a part of this series, and I hope to reconnect with you both soon.
Thank you, Mikey. And now we have so much work to do because you had a lot of tough questions that I'm like, oh, I need to think about that more. So thank you.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Shukran.
Shukran.